But
Yeah.
well, it's good to be here. It's good to see you. Thank you for allowing me to send you over some questions, and thank you for agreeing to this.
Oh, of
Um,
course, man.
and this is I feel like this is a blessing having the opportunity to share this with you. Go through some deeper level questions. I feel like so many people these days, they can't get to deeper level questions and deeper level conversations just because everything is just so surface level.
Hmm.
But thank you for giving me the time.
No problem. Did you want me to pull up the questions too, or
I mean, if you want to, but if not, I've got them right here. So
okay, perfect.
awesome. Well, I guess before we get started, if you want to just kind of give a brief description of who you are, and then I'll do the same, and then that way there's some context behind, really how the conversation came about.
Yeah, my name's Jesse Carstairs. I'm a man of faith, a husband, a father, and I try to kick ass in everything I do.
I love it, love it. And you're also, I guess you could say you're a coach as well for men, and then I guess just people in general for marriage, for personal development, and a couple
Yeah,
other things as well, right?
yeah, men's relationship coach.
Okay.
So I actually don't work with women. Um,
Okay, I apologize. I thought I
no,
had
no,
seen.
you're totally fine.
Well, I had seen a clip with marriage, and so I didn't know if you worked with both, but so just with men.
No,
Cool.
yeah, I've had I'll have female guests on my podcast,
That's
but
what it is. Okay.
I actually don't work with any women. And then oftentimes my testimonials who are from women are in regards to the coaching I've done with their husbands.
Nice.
Yeah.
Really nice. Awesome. Well, then, I guess on my side, I'm David. I guess, a brand new author since September. I write novels with my dad, and the first one is Gabriel Locke, Bound by Law, and it will be the Gabriel Locke series across 7 novels. This is quite exciting for me. As you know, being an author, having I guess deeper level things on my mind, being able to ask you these questions are great. And so, obviously we have a lot of different topics that I sent you, just kind of divided by subgroup. And so, if you're ready, I mean, we'll dig into it.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. So the first topic that I had sent over was religion, and obviously you led by saying that you were a man of faith, which obviously I'm a man of faith as well.
Hmm.
Still have some more studying though on my side to do, so hopefully I'll catch up at some point. But first question is, were you born into a family that had, I guess, an educated or a deep Christian upbringing, or I guess obviously deep Christian ties?
I'm going to say kind of yes and no. And
Okay.
here's how I'll explain that is all growing up, I never once heard my mother say anything about God. I
Okay.
never once heard my mother talk about religion, but I had a father who briefly took us to church maybe when I was like 7. And
Okay.
then that was literally it. And it was because we were invited by people from down the street. But anytime I had questions about the Bible for growing up, for some reason, my father could recite verses, could, recite different books in the Bible, but the guy wouldn't know what he did last Saturday.
I love that.
So that's why I say yes and no, because my dad was always a believer,
Uh,
but he did not instill it in us unless it was randomly brought up.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. My own father, in many ways, was not was, but it is kind of the same. He and I go to church more often now.
Hmm.
But when I was a kid, definitely God was certainly talked about in the household. We obviously had pictures of, Jesus. We had crosses and crucifixes. I mean,
Hmm.
probably not littered everywhere, but the typical Hispanic custom is, you have the one
Hmm.
cross kind of above the threshold and then one above the bed. Um, but I learned a lot more about faith as I got older. But my parents definitely gave me the framework to kind of just be able to learn it really on the go. It was not something that I had a formal education for
Hmm.
by any means. So that was um, that was kind of interesting. And so the next question that I wanted to ask you, and you'll have to forgive me a second, I just clicked out of the questions that I sent.
You're totally fine.
But so if not, really what was it that obviously brought you to faith, right? Because it was something that your father could quote. and obviously something you talk
Mhm.
about randomly, but I guess if you weren't really brought up with it, what was there like a specific event, or was it kind of gradual over time that brought you toward faith or growing in your faith, I should say?
So there's a couple parts to that. The first one is my junior year of high school.
Hmm.
I was walking down the hall, headed north because all of our halls were a north, south, east, west hall type deal.
Cool. That's
And
nice.
I was in the west hall heading north, and I just had this feeling overcome me that said, "Go to church." And so I actually asked my father, "Hey, if I wanted to go to church, which one would I go to?" And he's like, "You should go to this church called Calvary Chapel." So I
Okay.
started to take myself there. I would just go by myself.
Yeah.
And then obviously through the rest of high school, college, I never lived as a believer by any means, but I said that I would. If a guy held a gun to my head, I'd be like, yeah, I believe. But my actions were not that of a believer. Kind of fast forward, started to get into, I was into Bible studies all through college, but never really took it serious. And then when my second son was about to be born, I wanted to be baptized before he was born.
Wow.
And that was huge. I felt so with the baptism, it's like, we're essentially cleaned of our sins and we are reborn. We are resurrected. You could say, just like Jesus was. He resurrected.
Yeah.
And that was the experience for me. I literally came out of that water. It was in March in northern Nevada, a cold river,
Cool. Yeah.
all the snow melt from Lake Tahoe coming down. And that's how I wanted it. I wanted it to be cold. I didn't want it to be in a heated, inflatable pool out on a deck. That's not what it is to, be a man of faith. It is that you're in a war.
Yeah.
So I did that. I came out of that water and I literally felt different. My employees the next day thought I was different.
Wow.
And then the icing on the cake was at finally marrying my wife a year after that, and making that covenant before God and being married before our community.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And I've
Um,
been diving in head first ever since.
that's it's an amazing story. Um, Thank you for sharing that. I learned something new about you. So I didn't know that obviously you had been with your wife and had a child, and then before
Mhm.
your second son was born, you obviously, as you just stated, got baptized. So then, did you? I take it you got married after your second son was born.
Hmm. One
Okay.
year after he was born.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's awesome. Um, so I guess my question with that is, now that you've mentioned Calvary Chapel,
Hmm.
um, have you? I guess what do you have a specific denomination that you belong to? Um,
My denomination is a follower of Christ.
just curious to know.
Yeah.
Awesome. And then
I,
go
I
ahead.
feel like we get caught up in the denominations, and I'm not here to say that one is good, bad, or better than the other.
No, I get that. Yeah,
But so I try to stick with, what did Yahweh God say? What does his son, Jesus Yeshua, say? And just that's where I go.
awesome. My other question, kind of piggybacking off of what you had said previously, with you were a believer if someone held a gun to your head, but you didn't actually live your faith.
Hmm.
Um, I think that looks different for a lot of different people, but I
Hmm.
think that most people will say like, yes, I was living my faith, or no, I wasn't. Obviously, there's a difference between being the opposite of your faith, or opposite of what you say, versus like obviously striving to follow your faith and then erring as any human being would do, right, and falling into sin every now and then. I guess my question to you is, kind of describe a little bit more about that process, what it looked like. Was it that you were an absolute madman, let's say, like Monday through Saturday, and then on Sunday you were making it to church, or was it something more of like, if somebody didn't hold a gun to your head, would you still proclaim Jesus as your savior? Kind of give us a little bit more of an explanation of what that was like.
Yeah. So living a life where you are trying to sleep with women and have no intentions of marrying them,
Yep.
living a life of instant gratification,
Yep.
chasing material objects, idling like money and success, and actually not having any relationship, regardless of what you do on Sunday, but
Right.
not even having a relationship with God or building a rapport. I never prayed
Okay.
ever during that time.
Okay.
There would be times where I would feel that the Holy Spirit would call me to do the right thing
Hmm.
in instances, and I would. I was never getting in like trouble. I was never
Sure.
doing anything to harm anybody, but there was zero intent to try and walk a Christ-like walk.
Okay.
And then it would only compound because then I'm only surrounding myself with men who are of like mind and, you know, girls, entertainment, travel, things like that. And I wouldn't change any of that for anything.
Hmm.
But, um, but yeah, who I am today and the way my thought process is just completely different.
Yeah. No, and I think that's something that I can attest to. I didn't get confirmed in the Catholic faith until I was 23, and I can tell you that there was a marked difference in who I was and how I acted at
Mm-hmm.
23 compared to what I was really up before that. Before that, I was entirely in the wrong frame of mind, entirely doing. I'm not going to say like entirely doing the wrong things because, like I said, like I didn't get in, or like you said, I wouldn't get in trouble into things either. Um, but my mindset was very different. My goals were different. What I was chasing was different.
Mm-hmm.
So I can definitely attest that. And I think a lot of people are on that walk, right? So what's nice about this. I love that. Is that your ringtone? I love
Yeah, sorry about that.
no,
Usually my phone's always on silent.
no, I need to apologize. That I love that ringtone. A buddy of mine where I used to work had that ringtone. So,
So
but
yeah,
yeah,
and to kind of touch on one more thing
sure,
is that the life I have now is filled with 1,000 times more joy
yeah,
than I ever had then at any point.
yeah,
And it's just one of the things. It's one of the reasons why I talk about the things that I do is so that maybe younger men, younger generations can have someone who speaks to them in the fact of because I didn't have someone who was like, "You're gonna marry her. You're gonna marry her. What are your intentions? Do you think this is the right thing?" You're No one told me that what I was doing was polluting my marriage by sleeping around with women. It's like I had a man tell me that the most crowded place in a marriage is the bedroom. And I tell you, the beginning and the middle of our relationship, from the time that we started dating to today, was definitely filled with that.
yeah. Yeah, I get that. Obviously, I'm an unmarried man, but you're not the first person to have said that, and there's really a lot to be said for it. But the other thing that I'd like to bring up is obviously you are a coach, helping men, I guess, really embrace their masculinity. And so one of the questions that I have, and this comes off of a couple of things that I think I've heard from your previous podcasts
Mm-hmm.
or your different sessions is, you know, there is I'm not going to say like a stigmatism, but there's a bit of a belief that perhaps church as a whole and Western churches are becoming more and more, I guess, effeminate.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that now there's beginning to be a break and there's more of a move toward masculinity. But do you believe that that's something specific to individual churches? Do you feel that it's something that entirely depends on who the pastor is? Do you think that it's kind of a softening of people as a whole, and so therefore it's reflected in the teachings. Just curious to know what your thoughts are on that.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's all the churches
Mm-hmm.
across Western culture.
Okay.
Okay, now, is there a church that's led by masculine men and you have men in that congregation who are masculine and involved in the church? I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure they're out there. But speaking in in generalizing, I think they've all been very feminized. And I think if you look at it, it was like after World War II, there was a lack of participation in the church amongst men. So it's a multi-generational thing. So it
Right.
wasn't something that happened overnight. And then you talk about, the softening of society. That is a huge part of it. We have this thing that I feel is a big problem in the church and Western culture is gluttony. We have tons and tons of just overweight pastors who are up there and saying all your sins are bad, but this forking knife sin that I have is not bad. It's socially acceptable.
Right.
So it's okay. And now it's like that same guy is going to get exhausted taking the groceries up a flight of stairs, to help the old lady next door.
Yeah.
So he's not going to be the one who's going to be willing to, protect the community or protect like your own tribe. Like, and when I talk to men in some of these churches, it's like if there was something bad happen, which is an anomaly, right? Like a school shooter is an anomaly. Someone shooting up a church, it's an anomaly.
Sure.
Okay. But are these men the ones who are going to protect themselves, or are they going to push some kid in front of them to save their own? It's like, what is the mindset of these same men who get up there and preach about things? But it's like, would you have even have survived in the time of Jesus, or would you give an in? Because people attempted to stone Jesus in the streets of his preaching.
Right.
Okay. His own disciples thought he was so radical that they would often contemplate leaving him.
Yeah, I mean that's normal for people to feel down. Although most of us did not have the privilege of seeing the living God like they did. So if
They,
they doubted, I mean sometimes we have doubts too, but
well,
I
I mean,
get
if you think even his own brother, James, never believed until he was resurrected and he saw him resurrected with his own eyes.
which was actually the thing that it's funny, when the Romans pretty much captured the apostles. They were like, "All right, we'll forgive you if you're willing to walk everything back except for him coming back from the dead."
And
And they were like,
they never
"You can
did.
you can kill us. We're not going to walk it back. Like this actually happened."
Yeah, all 12 were tortured. Like, all had brutal deaths.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and my point is, like, how many of these men, if you put them in that time, were willing to do what they do now, which is preach the gospel in front of a congregation of people back then in the Roman Empire? They wouldn't.
Yeah, I
There's the one guy from the one church who, is the exception. But generally speaking, they just won it. And
it's
it's sad.
it's funny you bring that up because there's a priest uh, in Texas. His name is Father David Michael Moses, and he gives a lot of commentary, and it's funny because he does a good job of explaining like certain things that are happening around the world. I don't know if you saw this, but about a week and a half ago now, it might even be 2 weeks. In the Congo, 70 Christians were just beheaded, including the pat. I mean,
Yeah.
they're just absolutely massacred. In Syria right now, Christians are being murdered left and right. Um, there was one pastor in the Congo that was separate. He was not part of that massacre, but um, he basically these soldiers came in. Um, they threatened him to stop. He offered them wine or whatever, and he did so that people, his congregation could actually escape because that's really what he set up. He was like, focus on me, the rest of you guys get out, and they murdered him brutally. I mean, they just stabbed him, and he didn't. It was like one of those fatal stabbings, but he didn't like yell out or this and that and the other. He just prayed for them. Like as he was dying, he prayed for them. And that level of martyrdom is something you ask yourself, am I willing to do this? And I think in our society, people are being softened so that they don't do that. We are being softened so that we don't stand up for our ideals. We fall into gluttony. We fall into these, seven deadly sins, sloth, etc., so that we're not as resilient from control. But yeah, it's a pretty crazy thing. We have the comforts of living in the Western world, and over there, they're being tortured just to meet, meet and preach, and this is
Mhm.
this stark difference.
I mean, and even more proof of it, if you just look at COVID and the pastors around the churches who just gave in to, we're not going to gather because someone else tells us not to. We're going to prevent you guys from gathering. That what if there was a religious persecution? It's like you guys gave in with COVID. Like you guys aren't fighting back if there's a religious persecution like in these other countries.
Uh, I don't know. I think it's a little. I think it's different because if there were serious persecution, I think many people would unite. I think that that's part of the reason that we saw this shift in the election.
Well, I
People.
think you would have groups of people who would, because, and then it's like, what is it that causes them to unite? Because it's like, how much do you take? So if there was, pretend there wasn't ever any sort of COVID, it's like, would they were not have united then? Or are people learning their lessons, like you said, this last election through COVID? Or are people like finally putting up with it because there's a series of steps that are indicating it?
Yeah, I think from what we've genuinely seen, um, I think that people are changing, and I think they are waking up. I mean, but I don't know if you've seen, but Bible sales are up like 30 something percent, and they're up like almost
Yeah,
70% among people that are like between the ages of 18 and I think 26.
I've seen
So
that. Yeah.
it's a beautiful thing. It's a shame that it was born out of this, right? And that it wasn't just
Hmm.
people in normal circumstances wanting to thirst for more. But regardless, it is a beautiful thing that when faced with these kinds of circumstances, they decided to rise above as opposed to simply shudder away. And we're kind of breaking off that bondage of this is what we were entrapped with, and we're just going to take it, and that's it.
Hmm.
Uh, but I love this. We're only on like question 4, and I've got 2 pages of questions here. But kind of moving forward, so you obviously stated that you grew into faith later. Was
Hmm.
your wife of faith when you met her, or was this something you guys did together? Um,
She was not. She was born of the most atheist family you could. At the dinner table, they would make snarky remarks that because you were a person of faith, and then look and say, "Oh, but you're okay."
that's what they would say to you.
Yeah, that actually happened to me once at the
I
dinner
believe
table
that.
there. So,
I was at dinner one time with a girl that I really liked, and her friend was across, and her friend was like, "I don't know why you're dealing with this guy. He's a writer who's never going to make it." And
oh,
she said something along the lines of, "Yeah, long distance relationships aren't worth it anyway." So I get it. I've been at that. I've been at that table. I had a friend of mine yesterday who told me that I'm in limbo because I don't own a house and I don't have a dog and a picket fence. So funny how that works out. But hey, these things happen, right?
yeah. Well, if it makes you feel any better, I don't own a house. I'm a believer in renting.
Hey,
I do have a dog, though.
you've got me beat because you got a dog.
I
You
got
have
the
a dog,
dog.
you have a dog, a wife, and 2 kids. So
Yeah.
so at least
But yeah, and then again, a buddy, the same buddy who told me about the crowded bedroom,
yeah.
also told me if you ever want her to be a woman of faith and follow, you have to lead by example in every aspect of it. And this was a long time ago into my journey before I am where I am today, and that has completely stuck with me, and it is proven true.
100%. I mean, I believe you 1,000%. I mean, I've seen it in my own life. I've seen people who, you know, it, they have a complete and total change in their lives. I had the privilege. I have an uncle of mine, my uncle Alex, love him to death, and he's a man that he attends mass probably either every day or 5 or 6 times a week. Um, I had the privilege of going and hanging out with the St. Ignatius fraternity, which is a separate fraternity within the Knights of Columbus up in Virginia at St. Leo's Parish. And it was really wonderful because these guys that were getting up on Saturday morning, didn't matter how cold it was. It was like 10 degrees when I went out there with them. We were up at 4:30 in the morning. We were at the church parking lot by 5 o'clock, and every guy was working out. There probably were like 8 of us. And then
That's
at
cool.
6 o'clock, oh, this was awesome. And then at 6 o'clock, we finished the workout by 6:15. We're having water, coffee, orange juice, whatever. The priest came in, and then we're probably at this point about 30, 35 of us. Um, and the priest was talking about how you really have to live your faith, and how you have to be resilient, and you have to really like pretty much practice what you priest or preach. And he was telling us a story about the difference between men that are strong and men that look strong. And one of the things he did was, in the Catholic faith, before you get married, you have a year of counseling, spiritual counseling with the priest, to make sure that you're in line. You're obviously have the same beliefs, that you go into it, obviously as the Bible tells us to. And he said that he had a couple. It was a girl who was of the church, and she was marrying another guy, or she was marrying a guy who was a Marine, and he was kind of new into faith. And he said that he could tell that they had been sleeping together for a while. And he looks at the guy and he says, if you're truly committed to her and to this new life, are you willing to stop having sex for the next 3 months until you get married? It's only 3 months. And the guy said, how dare you, tell me what to do with my body. I love her. I'd be willing to die for her. I'd be willing to go to war for her, all these different things. And he says, yeah, but you won't stop from desecrating her.
Hmm.
You're not married to her yet. And they ended up getting married. The guy goes on his first deployment and he sleeps with like 10 women.
Oh,
Just absolutely destroyed it. And the priest had actually told her, he basically said, hey, I need to speak to you in private, to the girl. And he said, I'm telling you right now, get out of this, because this is not going to last. If he can't even hold off for 3 months, what's he going to do on a 6-month deployment? And this is
hmm
not to hate on military men. That's not the case. It just happened to be this one individual who happened to be a
hmm
Marine. But it's really about living, it's really about living by that code. And I think that so many people these days are just, they're lost. They don't know what plan to follow. They don't know who they are. They don't know what society expects of them, because they don't even know what they expect of themselves.
hmm
So it's a really beautiful thing that you and your wife were not of faith, and then you really grew into faith together. And now I assume that both of you are obviously believers, and it's not just you. Um,
hmm
that's a wonderful thing. Let me ask you: Do you? I imagine you probably share this faith with your children as well. Do you read the Bible to them and talk to them consistently about faith?
I do not read the Bible to them, but we
Okay,
talk about faith regularly. They actually are in a kids Bible study group that meets during the week.
awesome.
So it's not just like Sunday at church. And we will go over, they have these little kid Bibles and we go over that stuff with them.
Okay,
Yeah. And we talk about God on a regular basis. It's
that's
my
awesome.
wife jokes like, you have a homeschool kids when like they're just talking about Jesus. Yeah.
Amen.
Instead of video games or whatever other
The
kids are
truth.
talking about.
Yeah, but it's the truth, the way, in the life.
Yeah.
And it's obviously a different walk for every person.
Hmm.
If there's one thing that I wish, I had a very historical and very much so, I wouldn't even say theological, but I would say I had almost an academic upbringing with the Bible. My
Hmm.
father, the most important lesson that my dad probably ever taught me in church was, I was 7 years old. This is at Blessed Trinity in Miami Springs with Father Carney. And it had to have been either Easter or right before Easter. Church was packed. Have you ever heard the term Cheester?
Cheester?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
They're Catholics. They go to church on Christmas and Easter. So they're
Oh,
called.
okay.
But anyway, so right before Easter, it was just absolutely packed with people. And I think it goes without saying, our fathers are ultimately the men that we look up to in terms of how to look forward. And we got to mass probably like a couple minutes before it began, and the priests were very good about saying, "Hey, if you are, if you are a pregnant woman or you're a young child or whatever, please make sure that there's space so that everybody can sit. Men stand." Father Carney was very good about that. And I'll never forget that I was seated, a child, 7, and I look behind me for whatever reason, and I see my dad is speaking with a woman who's pregnant and carrying her child. And my father just immediately walked up to me, pulled me out of my chair, and obviously let her sit. And I said to him, when I got to the back, I said, "Dad, why did you pull me out of the chair?" And he just looked at me and he said, "It's the right thing to do. But on top of that, do you really think it would be comfortable for a woman who's pregnant to carry her child and stand all that time?" And that was a lesson in empathy that he gave me from a very young age. And, it's just kind of a reflex thing now, that comes from it because I learned that from my dad. But I think it's awesome that you have your kids, in Bible study and that you're constantly talking to them about faith. I mean, if we're not our children's first teachers, then we're leaving their education to others. And that's a pretty dangerous thing.
Yeah, and that's so true.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
next question that I have for you is, um, aside from Jesus, who I imagine is probably your most cherished person in the Bible, is there any particular person from the Bible that you, I guess, relate to or you really empathize with in terms of the struggle that they went through? Because obviously we know the Bible is a book that is filled with many different books and many different, I don't even want to say the word characters, but people
Hmm.
who have suffered through different things in their lives, and obviously their struggles are different. But I do want to ask you: is there anyone in particular from the Bible that you really appreciate and kind of relate to?
There's going to be two. I'm going to give you an Old Testament and New Testament.
Love it.
So, Old Testament is Job. The
I love it.
fact that he has an unshakable faith,
Yeah.
even when his friends are telling him he must have done something wrong. And we need to cultivate an unshakable faith.
Yeah.
Like, what is your identity in? Because most people's identity is in something that can be easily taken away from them. So that's one, because I have an unshakable faith. And number two is probably Paul,
Okay.
because people can change. And just because someone had a past where Paul murdered Christians
Yeah. Yep.
does not mean that someone can't change.
Yeah.
It's like, I think I've heard this quote, and I'm going to totally butcher it, but it's like, you judge me on my past, but let's see where you're at in your future.
I have a good one for you, which I guess is paraphrasing that. But a friend of mine actually has it tattooed on his arms, and the way that it goes is every sinner has a future, and every saint has a past.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yeah.
personally love that.
Yeah.
And I think that it's interesting. I saw a video recently, and it was about Christianity and how Christianity is a little bit different because it's not about you trying to get to God; it's about you allowing God to come in and change you. And this concept that the Holy Spirit is part of the Trinitarian God, where obviously we have God the Father, Jesus Christ the Son, and the Holy Spirit that dwells within us,
Mm-hmm.
is very unique because in almost every other, actually not in almost every other religion, in every other religion, God does not dwell within us, right? He's
Mm-hmm.
seen as separate. But yet in Christianity, it most certainly is. And I think that that is what gives us the opportunity to really change, is because we allow God to come into our hearts and change us.
Mm-hmm.
So this is really great. I'm sure we could probably talk about this all day, but I do have some other I do have
Okay. Yeah.
some other questions. Um, so the next subgroup is marriage.
Okay.
How long did you know your wife before you proposed? What were the biggest struggles in your marriage? during like the first couple of years. And now I know a little bit more about you. So obviously you got married after the birth of your second child, but how
Hmm.
long were you guys together? Um, and then how, I guess, what were some of the biggest struggles? And then when you accepted faith, now that I know that you accepted faith, or I guess she accepted faith a little bit later, how did that look in terms of transitioning and truly falling in love with Christ?
So gosh, I don't remember if our son was like 3 or 4 until I proposed.
Okay. Your
Yeah,
first.
yeah, my first one, and then he might have been 2 or 3 actually, because by the time he was 4 when our second one was born,
Okay.
so he might have been 2. Yeah, so he was probably 2. So that means, man, my math is not mathing right now, but we were probably together for like 5 years, maybe
Okay.
6. I bet you she knows because
I
here's
will take
something.
that bet that she knows.
When I proposed, she actually thought I was pranking her.
No.
She thought it was a prank because she didn't think I was ever going to propose. She thought we were going to be that couple that was just like together forever. And she had really bought into that. The fact of like, we don't need to be married. We have kids. It's just like we're married. But there was a part of me that's like, no, that ain't good. So
Awesome.
yeah, I proposed to her after we had our first child. And then what was some of the struggles the first 3 years?
Yeah, the original question was, the first 3 years. But I guess my question is, what were some of the struggles that you had? Because I guess now it's a two-part thing. So you
Mm-hmm.
obviously got together and you had your first child. So what did your struggles look pre-marriage, and then what did your struggles look like post-marriage? Were there any? What's the difference? And I think what you just said about how she had accepted that you were just going to be one of those couples that had kids, and you said
Mm-hmm.
that's not going to fly. Like, this. I think a lot of people now assume that it's not going to say like okay, but they just kind of live with that. And I
Yeah,
guess this really provides us with an opportunity for you to give your experience and your mindset behind why
yeah.
you wanted to get married. And I think that people need to know that.
I think this actually is a good question on why I coach men, because
Love
I
it.
feel like the struggle is something that is not just from me. So if we go to the first handful of years, not just dating, because like that's fun. Everyone has a great relationship when they're dating because it's
Sure.
only full of fun and adventure, etc. And then you have a child or you get married. And then there becomes real responsibility and like leadership and running the household, being the head of the household, having those biological and biblical roles that complement one another. We're the yin and yang. But if we don't understand that, then it's all out of whack. And we have a series of generations of men who are not actually raised to understand the concept of being good at being a man. And we think just being morally good as a man is okay, but we're actually missing the ball. So our struggles were I felt disrespected and that she didn't want to like listen to what I wanted to do or run the household. There would be times where she would have all these emotional ebbs and flows and I just didn't fucking care
Right.
because I don't have emotional ebbs and flows. I am like Job, like unshakable, like I don't get anxiety, I don't get depression. Those external things don't bother me. So why are you talking about my future wife, letting those things bother you? And I was trying to make her more like me. And she would nag, and it would just be like, oh my gosh, woman. And now, hindsight, she didn't feel safe and secure. I
Right.
didn't even understand the emotional triggers that she had. And I do now. I know her the top 3 things that make her feel the least safe and secure. Okay. And I know what makes her feel most safe and secure. I'm at a point where I can read her energy and I will pretty much 99% know what the problem is, and I can help fix or comfort her so that she can deregulate, that her cortisol levels go down, and she gets some oxytocin because I'm hugging her for a long period of time, and she can be in a good state. But it took me having to like look in the mirror and go, what the fuck is wrong? Like, this sucks.
But I have to give you a lot of credit for the wisdom that you had to look in the mirror and say, this is something I need to fix.
Yeah.
Because there are an immense amount of people, both men and women, that they're like, I'm Peachy King. Why can't you
Mm-hmm.
get why can't you get with the program? And, there's something to be said about the denial of the self and
Mm-hmm.
wanting to grow. And so I really I commend you for that because most people just they don't have that desire to want to fix something. They'll just leave it and move on.
Mm-hmm. And she comes from a family that's quick to anger, like 0 to 100, like seeing red. So there would be times where she would want to fight, and I would just be like, argue back because I would want to win. I would want to win the argument. So there was just so many of these things. And then you asked about the three years after like the marriage, okay, like the different.
Yeah.
It's like night and freaking day. Like, oh my gosh. Like,
Yeah.
again, the reason I am into men's relationship coaching is because I have the most fairy tale movie Instagram scene marriage there is in fucking real life. Like,
That's amazing.
I never thought I would have the love for any human as much love as I have for her. And total time were almost like 14 years.
Wow.
There was some time in the beginning where there was some on and off through dating phases, you know. But if we just can, from the first time that we started hanging out till now, and like it's coming on 14. So it is so different to where there's never any fighting, and someone might be like, that's not human. Jordan Peterson says, like, you're humans, like you guys will have disagreements. We
Sure.
do have disagreements, but there's never like yelling anymore.
Yeah.
It's it'll be like little things and then explanations, or she feels safe and secure in all realms to where there's never nagging. Nagging is like gone away. She doesn't feel she needs to push me to do something in order to feel safe. I communicate with her on a whole nother level,
Yeah.
and I let her know things ahead of time so that she doesn't feel like in this fight or flight, like, do I feel safe in this situation? Because I understand where her emotional triggers are right now. But versus before, and before I would want to change her. Hey, you need to let it go. I wouldn't let it bother me. But now I totally respect for all those feelings that she has. And I actually go towards her when I see these things starting to come up just through her body language and her energy. And I'm like, it's all right. I'm here for you. And I either let her talk it all out, because women, they either want to talk it all out or they want to talk it out and then you fix the problem. So that's always on the table. Do you want me just to listen
Or do
for
you want me
however
to?
long, or do you want me to fix? And she just lets me know. And then it's like, it's night and day difference, man. It is. Marriage is awesome.
No, I believe that it's funny what you were talking about, kind of the wanting to win the argument. There was a girl that I was head over heels in love with, and we didn't work out. But I'll never forget. I was dog sitting at a friend's house, and she just called me, and we ended up having like a 2 hour discussion. And she's the kind of person that unfortunately just has saboteur behavior, and she just doesn't want to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
She's someone who's not of faith, and it makes it difficult because, in my opinion, faith is the greatest growth mindset, like bar none. Whether you believe in Christ or not, if you have faith, it is the greatest growth mindset. Now, obviously, it's different for us because we're Christians, but we were having this discussion because it never got into an argument. But it's funny because every single point that she brought up, I just kind of took care of it and wrapped everything up and this and that and the other. And after like an hour and a half of having this discussion, she went back and she found this one thread that I guess like was unclear and brought it up again.
Mm.
And all I could do was laugh. And I just started laughing. And she's like, "Why are you laughing at me?" And I said, we've gotten to the point where if you truly feel that you need to be right, you can be right. But don't prove me wrong when you know that you just need to be right. And
Mhm.
she was like, "Fine, I can live with that." But it's funny how these things turn out because, the, what is it? Men are always wrong type deal. And yeah, I know. So anyway, thank you for sharing that. So the next question was, how did you overcome those struggles? And what do you feel were the biggest lessons from what you learned? And I know that you kind of partially answered this with the previous one, but I guess what were the biggest struggles?
So some of those struggles that I mentioned, it was I had to like not try and fix her. I
Yeah,
had to I had to understand. I had to do the research on like this can't be the way.
right,
And then it's like even when you dive into the Bible from Adam and Eve, Adam wasn't taking responsibility. He wasn't being accountable. He was blaming her. You know, she ate the apple and then she just handed it to me. What am I supposed to do? Not eat? Is we and So there was no leadership. He's standing an arm's length away from her while she's just having a conversation with a serpent. You're not. You're literally not being a protector in that moment. You
no,
are not. You are being passive. So it's like can't be passive. Have to figure this out. And then we go to First Testament, and Jesus calls us to love our wives as Christ loved the church and died for her. Are we? Are we committing sacrificial love? It's like, are we? There's, and it's, and again, it says in Ephesians, women submit to your husbands. But first, we have to be worth submitting to.
right,
Are we loving her as Christ loved the church? Those things go hand in hand. There are only two verses apart from each other, maybe three off the top of my head.
right.
They're right there. So, in order for me to like lead and her to follow and trust, there was a lot of work I had to do. And I had to like take a deep dive into what it is because we're not taught this, which is very unfortunate. And I do believe that there was a time where men were taught how to be good men. And then some reason it died off. And it's a kind of like figure it out yourself one day. Good luck. Because I ask men all the time, what does it mean to be a man? And I'll get responsibility. And I'm like, okay, my 8-year-old does his fucking chores every day. And sometimes I don't have to ask, but that doesn't make him a man because he takes care of his responsibilities. And then someone will say, when you're married and you're paying all your own bills. It's
Oh
like,
God,
okay.
that is
It's
okay.
like, okay. But what kind of legacy does that leave? Like, what are your children doing? Like, what is your wife doing? Is she cheating on you? Like, that you just leave it that it's just way too open for all these possibilities and likelihoods in today's society. So that one's not good either. And it stumps a lot of guys. So
Well, do you want to
you
define
just
it?
have to be good at being a man.
Yeah, define it for everyone. I
So
think it's a
here's something. So a good man oftentimes is he tells the truth. He may have integrity, does good deeds. But when we think of a good man, all those qualities are no different than qualities that can be attained by a woman.
sure.
Okay, so we got to take almost the morality out of it.
Hmm.
Okay, because morality should just be one of your tools, and it
Yeah,
shouldn't be the only thing that is the differentiating factor between good at being a man versus a good man. Because a good man is moral. Okay, so we'll take that.
sure.
The guy who's good at being a man he is continuously working to improve in every aspect of his life.
That I like.
Okay.
Yep.
Being good at being a man is continuously working on his physical strength, his mental strength, and his emotional strength. Okay. Being good at being a man is a man who is desired by other men to be in their tribe.
Hmm. I like
Because
that a lot.
you have to think, if the zombie apocalypse is to now, or we're in the time of Jesus, do you want this man to be in your tribe to help survive, help to keep you and your children alive? Can you rely on that person to do what they say? Because you have a moral man, but being good at being a man, there's going to be decisions you're going to have to make in order to protect your community and your family that are not moral, like maybe murder, going to war, to fight, just having the mental fortitude that you're willing to do something like that.
I think
So
that's
it's
great.
one of those things where it's like it needs to transcend time, not just today, because we live in the comforts of society. But if the zombie apocalypse is tomorrow, or Elon's practicing creating a time machine and actually puts you back 10,000 years ago, or you're even on the Oregon Trail, which was not very long ago,
No, the
and
Oregon
you
Trail was
literally,
150 years ago, more or
yeah,
less.
it's, and you're literally responsible for like their life and safety while still allowing women to feel safe enough that they want to reproduce.
Yeah.
Because women don't want to have sex if their cortisol levels are too high. It's a stress hormone. And how do we make them feel so safe that they're still willing to reproduce and create more sons and continue on your lineage? If you're just a good man, how do you do that?
So I think a lot of what we can glean from this is that perhaps a lot of the emasculation of men in society is not just simply one thing or another, but I think a
Mm-hmm.
lot of it is we live in a more comfortable society. So the concept of survival
Mm-hmm.
is not maybe as much of a forethought, as people have.
Mm-hmm.
Then coupled with the fact that there's not really a playbook for most men, right? They're kind of stuck to
Mm-hmm.
figure it out on their own. Um, and a lot of them, I think, if they are of faith and they've read the Bible, then obviously they're given, much more of a plan to follow and certainly examples, right? We obviously talked about Job. I personally affiliate a lot with, the story of David,
Oh,
not
I
just
mean,
because, not just
that
because
one's
I
good.
am David, but,
Mm-hmm.
um, but because I think there's something to be said. There was something I read recently that said, when God made David a king, he didn't send him a crown, he sent him Goliath. And I think there's a lot to be said with that. I think we all have different, I guess you could say, moments of adversity or
Mm-hmm.
challenge that we go through. Um, but I think the part that you were saying about, being a good man is not just, or sorry, being good at being a man is not just being a good man. There's so much more involved
Yeah,
with it. And I think a lot of it also is, who do you trust to have your back?
that's part.
Um,
Yeah, that's part of it.
who do you really trust? And, I can tell you that I've certainly met people in my life. The people that I consider part of my close tribe are guys that I know that if I were in a back alley fight, I would trust them to not ignore me and to put their lives on the line to come help.
Yeah.
Or if they were there with me, I know that we could take on anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that that's really my tribe of men. I obviously have women that I'm very close to as friends, and I think it's important to have people who are close friends of the opposite sex because it gives you a lot of perspective. But same thing. I wouldn't expect any one of those women to like turn around and defend me, but at least let me know where the guy's coming from if he's coming from behind. You know what I mean? So I have, and I know that we're coming close to time because I know at 3 o'clock that would kind of be the end of this. But and it's I
Do
had
you
two.
do you have a hard stop?
I do not. So if you're willing to continue, then we can
Yeah, I can
continue.
keep going.
Okay, great. Um, so the next question that I had from you was, what advice would you give to couples who are newly married, and what advice would you give to those who are getting close to marriage? So let's say they're, obviously the ones that are newly married, but then also, I guess, those that are in a serious relationship but not yet have proposed. or at least those who have proposed, like what is the advice that you would give?
Oh, make sure God is the center of your marriage.
Okay.
Yeah, that you made a covenant. Stay true to that covenant, because it's easy, especially as lukewarm Christians, to, we got married before God, we made a covenant, but to understand what that means, to put him at the center of your marriage, to pray together, and then have hard conversations early, because too many couples, so now I'm kind of getting into the relationship ones, you guys want to wait to have hard conversations the day that they happen.
Right.
Why wouldn't you just have those off the bat?
Yep.
Because again, I didn't do it this way, but I am not a fan of dating. It's a social construct. It's an excuse to sleep with someone until you find someone else to sleep with. If you plan on courting a woman, practice chivalry, and if you have zero intention of marrying her, stop wasting her time. There's no reason to date her.
Yeah. I agree 1000% with everything you just said. For
So
sure.
have those hard conversations right off the get go, because if it freaks them out, they're not the one.
I couldn't agree with you more. Um, Next question that I have for you was, so how did your relationship with your wife change as you welcomed your first child?
Oh, I realized, well, one, we weren't married then, but two, I realized I had to fucking change and step up, because
Okay.
I was like one night away from being total dirtbag.
One night.
Well, it was just that early before we were pregnant, there was just so rocky, and it was all because of me. It wasn't because of her.
Okay. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
I could have messed it all up and not have this wonderful family that I have. And I'm just so glad that I didn't.
Yeah, I know I've only just met you, but I'm very glad that you didn't mess it up either. Because I think that the joy that I hear in just having this interview with you and not even knowing you all that well, it's abundant in your voice. And I think that, a blessing like that is something that we all hope for.
Hmm.
And so I'm grateful for you that you didn't mess it up, because to see this level of joy in a person is fantastic. Um, so congratulations.
No, thank you.
Um, so here's another question for you. This is still on the topic of marriage, but
Mhm.
how do you believe, or I guess, what do you believe is the right ratio of time spent alone with your wife, away from your children, um, or being at home, compared to or with your full family? How much time you spend with your full family. And I say that because this is something that's kind of appeared to me as a topic over time.
Hmm.
But you hear about people who get married and then they kind of only live for the kids.
Yeah, it's terrible.
And I think that there's something to be said about, you should still date your wife even though you're married. And
Yep.
obviously it's the concept of keeping things fun, adventurous, taking time to spend quality time. So what would you say is probably a healthy or a good ratio for the time that you guys spend together versus the time that you spend as a family? And then even
Oh,
time that you spend alone, for your own, just kind of
uh,
de-stressing, decompressing. Kind of give us an idea of what that looks like.
I guess the alone thing is different for everybody, because
Sure.
I get a lot of alone time. So I call them mini vacations.
Yes, I saw that earlier on one of your posts.
Yeah. So it's funny that you bring it up, because I did post about it today on my stories. I take mini vacations every single day, and it's while my entire family's sleeping. So
Hmm.
it does not impact the family dynamic.
Gotcha.
I go do 3 miles, they're in bed. I go to the gym, they're in bed. I come home, maybe one of them's awake by the time I get home from the gym. So doing that, eating, reading, hitting the gym, coming home, maybe one of them's awake by then.
So what time do you get up then? 4?
Four,
Yeah, I
four every
figured that.
day on the
Yeah.
dot. It doesn't matter if it's a weekend.
And what time do you go to bed?
Oh man, that's always like up in the air. If I could, if I could, if I could, it would be 8, but
If
it's
you could,
not.
it'd be 8. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
closer to like 10 or 11.
No, never 11. By then I'm grumpy.
By then you're
If
grumpy.
by 11 I'm grumpy. Yeah.
Okay.
Um,
Not bad though. From 10 to 4 is 6 hours of sleep. But it's funny when you say 8 o'clock. Tom Brady, his big thing was they were like, "What's the secret to your success?" And he goes, and they were all expecting some like
mhm.
insanely awesome thing. He goes, "No, I go to bed at 8:30 every night." And they were like, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, I mean, unless I'm playing a game." He's like, "Unless I'm playing a game or this and that and the other, I go to bed at 8:30 every night."
Yeah, and this is an arrangement that I have with my wife that she puts my boys to bed.
Okay,
Yeah, because it's one of those things like of communication. It's like, all right, what can we do to make this thing work? My thing that I'm the most strict on in my household is my sleep, bar none. You can ask my wife. I will eat fucking eggs every day for the rest of my life as long as I can have my sleep.
I love that.
It's like it doesn't matter. I'll wear sweats and a sweater every day the rest of my life and look like I'm partially homeless or a billionaire, depending on who you ask.
Yeah,
But
depending on who you ask.
yes,
But
but if I can just have my sleep, that's my thing in the house is I want my sleep. And then my wife, she has her things, and it's like, okay, we don't interrupt mom when she does X, Y, Z.
no,
But back to the question. So I get my alone time, and
sure.
I'm freaking charged, fresh, ready to go. I don't need vacations. I get my minis. When it comes to a couple, the husband and wife, spend as much time as you can.
Okay.
Intentionally do it too. How are you going on an intentional date every week? How are you intentionally waking up early and hanging out in the morning, even if it's only every other day? I, like Jordan Peterson's, spend 90 minutes a week just talking about how the household is being run, minimum. So we calendar that, and then we calendar other time that we hang out. We go on walks. We plan where we're going to go walk for an hour, just holding hands and just talking.
Sounds
We'll
awesome.
plan day dates where it's like grandma takes the boys and we're just dating a whole day. Like, and if you don't plan it with intention, everything else that you don't want will be planned for you. And then the children, I'm a huge proponent of stay at home moms, all that stuff. Okay. I'm old school.
I know. I've been part of this
So
conversation before, and a few.
there's the small parts of when they're a fresh baby to, I don't know, 2.5, two maybe,
Sure.
where my wife is like, nobody's watching my kids. This is my baby.
Right.
And I'm like, cool. I never once was like, we should have someone watch the kid. With their first son, she got to a point where she would let my mom watch him. And then obviously my second son, there's a point where she would let my mom watch the boys. But I respected that, and I realized that this is a small season of our
Of
life.
course.
And that once this season's over, we're in a new season where it's back to dating and courting her. It's like it's so many little things. Like, I do not like Costco. Everyone knows what Costco is. But if I go to Costco, I will buy her a bouquet of flowers.
I do have to ask, why is it that you don't like Costco?
I it kind of goes to that COVID conversation. I fucking hated how they ran, how they were operating during COVID, and now they have you scan your card to even go in there. I'm like, you guys are just straight communists. So I actually do subscriptions now. I like literally took one day and was like, everything I buy from Costco, where can I get it in other places and it be better? I actually spend more money now, I think, by a little bit, but
Yeah.
I don't care. I'm like, fuck you, got Costco. Yeah. But there's a couple things that I do go in there and I only spend like $60 now, when it used to be like 400 every week in Costco. Now it's like maybe 60, $50 because there's these specific things that they have. And then I grab a bouquet of flowers.
I think there's something to be said about the bouquet of flowers. And as a guy who has sent flowers even across continents, uh,
Ooh.
yeah, I had a pretty good story. I met it. So the girl I had told you about, that her friend sat across, and she, that all didn't work out for a number of different reasons. But Um, very shortly after that, I got on a train in I got on a train in Spain, and I was coming back from San Sebastian, and it was San Sebastian is located all the way in the north in the Basque Country, and I
Okay.
was trying to get back to Madrid, and the only ticket available was one of those. Basically, they call them the slow trains, but it makes stops in every single place
Mm.
before I got onto one of the fast trains, and I had just been in the Netherlands not very long before, so I was wearing the Dutch national jersey, which is like this orange color. So I looked just like the train attendants that
Mm.
worked there. And there was a woman who was traveling from San Sebastian to Burgos to be with her family. And she was there with her 1.5 year old son, and she was pregnant 7 months. And I can tell you for a fact that God definitely put me on that train because this woman had no help. She was supposed to be helped by one of the people that looked like me,
Mm-hmm.
uh, but they were short on staff. Somebody called sick. They had the flu, whatever the heck it was. So I spent the entirety of this time, it had to have been 7 hours on a train that had no air conditioning, helping this woman. I literally like shielded her child as she was literally changing his diaper, from him having soiled it, the whole thing. So after going through all of that, then transferring trains where I took literally her bags for her and everything, get on a different train, and we're on our way uh, from wherever that was. I think it was like Miranda to Burgos. We say goodbye at Burgos, whatever, and then I get on my fast train. When I'm on the fast train heading to Madrid, we go to this place called Palencia, which is located just north of Valladolid. And in Palencia, the train freaking breaks down. So we have to wait an hour and a half. And as we're getting off the train, I see probably one of the most beautiful women I've ever seen in my life. And so I just followed her like a complete creep. I'll admit this. I just followed her onto that train and ended up sitting right next to her. Had this great conversation. And then she ended up buying me the tickets for the stop in Valladolid once we finally got on there, so that I could make it to Madrid. And it was like this whole thing. I was this American writer who was bilingual. On this train in Spain, and I met this great girl, and what was supposed to be like a 10-minute chat ended up being like an hour and a half because the train was broken down and all this other
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And so I find out that her birthday is November 9th, and she had broken up with her boyfriend like literally the day that I met her, which I did not know she even had one when I sat next to her. And she and I had been chatting, whatever, because she added me on Instagram, and I found out when her birthday was. And she was really sad because she had obviously broken up with a boyfriend and this and that. So I get on the phone literally on the 7th, and I call an international call from Miami from Palm Beach to Valladolid. And I'm on the phone with a guy in Valladolid named Felix, who is the greatest florist that will ever live.
Mm-hmm.
And I get on the phone with him and I go, hi, this is David Cancio calling. He goes, where are you calling me from? And I said, I'm calling you from the United States of America. And he goes, what on earth are you doing calling me from the United States of America? And I said, well, I'm trying to send flowers. There's someone that I met and her birthday's in 2 days. And he goes, and this is like, who? Like your cousin? Is this like are you a Spanish citizen? And you're sending flowers back to your wife or something? I said, no, there's a girl I met on a train. He goes, a train? This train must have been a long train. I said, actually, it was from Valencia to Valladolid. He goes, that's 10 minutes. What the hell did you do with 10 minutes on a train?
Yeah.
Probably thinking all kinds of things. But long story short, uh, the guy got so enthused by the whole story that I paid for probably like a decent, bouquet of flowers.
Mm-hmm.
And this dude threw in like everything, being all
Cool.
excited about it. And he sent it to her. And, they delivered it at her work because obviously I didn't have her home address. And she legit, like the next day, just messaged me all over WhatsApp. And she was like, oh my God, like, what is this? I was just not expecting this. This has made my birthday like one of those things. And, there's something to be said about taking the time and having an effort for someone that you really care about. And even
Mm-hmm.
something as small as like every time you go to the grocery store and you get a bouquet of flowers, it changes everything.
Mm-hmm.
And this girl never expected me to send flowers. Felix didn't expect me to send flowers
Yeah.
from across the ocean. But yeah,
Hmm.
the crazy thing was that they wouldn't even accept the credit card because it was an American credit card. So I had to actually PayPal one of my friends that lives in Spain who had to get on the phone and call
And
the
then pay.
florist and
Okay.
then pay for her to get it. But yeah, um, do you still have time, or do you have to get
Yeah.
going?
No, I'm good.
Okay, awesome. So the next question that I have for you is, okay, have you and your family experienced any serious hardships, and what did they look like, and what did you guys do to overcome them?
The only like hardships is trying to start a business and being super broke. But I guess the reason I don't look at it as hardships because it's like if you have kids, because we had one at the time, like they don't know any different.
Right.
It's just if you're trying to keep up with the Joneses.
Completely.
So other than that, like no.
Well, hopefully you don't have any more. Hopefully you don't have any hardships going forward. The next thing, and now this gets more into slightly more personal stuff, but this is about obviously childhood.
Hmm.
Um, so, in one of your videos, you mentioned that you got to know your great grandfather. So, what are some of the main life lessons that he passed down to you that have made you who you are? And I guess, in addition to him specifically, your great grandfather, your grandfather, and your father, what are different things that they've passed down basically through this masculine line and things that you've learned?
So my great grandfather, he bought a car when he was 13 and started a business because in 1926 is when he was 13. He was born in 1913.
Yeah.
There was no such thing as a license, a driver's license. One. Two, there was no such thing as a teenager.
Right.
You were treated by how you represented yourself as a man. So when people hear 13-year-old driving today, that's absolutely crazy. That's alien. It's like call CPS. But it's because of we are not respecting children as if they are adults while still allowing them to be children.
Right.
It's like he was so mature and in a place where you got to think, he had worked however long before that, saved the money
To buy a
to
car.
even buy that car, and then start a business. And he ended up owning this trucking company that was worth lots of money. And he was the grandpa who he had a Lamborghini. He had um, this special Cadillac and this. He collected cars, exotic cars, and he ended up getting into the movie business. And they would use his cars.
Wow.
One of his cars was in the movie Casino. One of his cars was in a this basketball movie where Shaq appeared, and he tried to buy his Cadillac. So he's met Shaq, Tom Hanks, everyone on Casino. He had I'm trying to think. The Last Dragon, the Bruce Lee story.
Yeah.
He had cars in there. When he pulls up to the big party at the big house, and there's all those like luxury cars.
They're all his.
No, not all of them, but two, because there's like five, but like two
Still.
of them are his. So my point is, you allow yourself to be as mature and as successful as you choose.
Right.
But nowadays, what are 13-year-olds doing? So it's like, how can I take the mindset of like what we allowed children to do in 1913, 1926, and how can I cultivate that with my own sons while still letting them be children?
Right.
And so that's really the thing. There wasn't, I guess, like a lesson, but it's like that reminder
Okay.
of the only reason we have a bunch of 13-year-olds running around fucking picking their nose with boners and like playing video games, and we think they're retarded, is because of how we parent them and culturally how we treat them. It's the only reason. It's a cultural thing.
I
And
guess
I want to break that with my sons.
I was gonna say. I mean, I played video games when I was 13. I don't know about the boners and the picking the nose, but
Oh,
definitely was.
dude, when I was in middle school, I just like you're going through puberty. It's just like they're just constant.
Oh, of course, it were constant.
Yeah, so that's what I mean. They were just constant. It's like, man, I'm always trying to hide these things in my pants and stuff. Like, what is happening?
Bro, the worst was when you had to get up in front of your class and you had one.
That's exactly. That's
It's a
I
nightmare.
remember that number of times.
It's like the famous. I'm not actually, you know, it's better than I not get into it.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
anyway,
So that is definitely the thing. It's like, how do you just cultivate that in my sons?
yeah, you know, I definitely get that. My grandfather on my dad's side. Well, both my grandfathers had it really rough, right? My parents are um, exiles from Cuba. You know,
Hmm.
both of them left. They left obviously at different times, but my father left when he was 6. My mother left when she was 4. My parents are 11 years of age different. And my grandfather on my father's side was a man who was an extremely intelligent man, very hardworking. Um, was this very promising lieutenant commander. You know, he had been invited to attend the War College in Providence, Rhode Island, 2 years in a row, and both times he actually graduated first from his class. So something really special. Had this brilliant naval career in front of him, and then there was a revolution in the country. And my grandfather was put on trial, sentenced to death. Luckily, he broke out, managed to come to the United States. Um, and my dad's life was not an easy life. I mean, my grandfather was behind bars, and my dad was a 5.5-year-old kid just looking at him.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, my father had 2 horses by the time he was 6, and all that was taken away. And I think there's something to be said about hard men that come from hard times, and
Hmm.
different things that happen, and really where you have to determine what direction you want to take your family. And I mean, I'd be lying to you if I told you that I developed the strategic mind that I had from school. No, I learned it from my grandfather. We
Hmm.
played Pacific General, we played Risk, we played Axis and Allies. My grandfather was consistently telling me stories about some of the missions he went on when he was, and I understand that my grandfather might be an exception to the vast majority of men who've never had
Yeah.
something. It's There are very few people that experience, what he did when he went into trial. And my grandfather was a serious character. When he went into trial, the prosecuting attorney said, if he's guilty, we are seeking the death penalty by firing squad. And if he's innocent, we want 10 years in jail. I mean, those were the things. And despite them saying that, when they called his name, they said, Umberto Cancio, please stand. And he didn't stand. And they said, Umberto Cancio, please stand. And he said, as far as I'm concerned, I will stand when I am addressed by my rank. And for the moment, I still have that rank. So you will address me by my rank before I stand. So then
That's cool.
They said, Lieutenant Commander Umberto Gancio, will you please stand? At that point, he stood and he addressed the court, the tribunal. But, the hard times for sure. And I think that hard times definitely make people. And I think that if there's one thing that we should try to pass on to our children, it's definitely the concept of working hard and then working smart.
Hmm.
And I think there's something to be said about giving them that responsibility while still allowing them to be children. And my grandfather absolutely threw responsibility in my face as a kid. When you're 9 years old and you're trying to take on a seasoned strategist in Axis and Allies and beat him, was that one of your sons?
Yeah, I was my youngest.
That's awesome. Was he saying hi, Dad?
No, he's wondering. He asked if I could finish my meeting later so we could go to the car store.
Well, so that actually, we can save this. I think we have some time blocked off for tomorrow and
Do you want to
for
finish this section?
okay, because I've got a couple of questions left. So, do you have siblings? And if so, what are the biggest challenges that you had with your siblings growing up versus what about now, if you have siblings?
I do. I have two sisters. I was not really close with my older one.
Okay.
And then my younger one, we were like besties. Yeah, we were really close. She was a freshman when I was a senior, and I was the big brother who, I remember one day she's walking to a car with a boy. I tell her to get in the car, being my little sister. She just hops right in the car. He calls her, and I say, "Can you hand me your phone?" She did not answer this phone. It's still ringing. She hands me the phone. I say hello. He asks for my sister, and I say, "Who is this?" And he says, "Can I just speak to my sister?" And I told him, "If you're not man enough to tell me your name, do not ever speak to my sister again." And she said he wouldn't even look her at her in the hallway after that.
So he didn't even tell you? Man, I would have
No,
turned around and been like, hey, my name is so and so.
no, he didn't tell me who it was. And all I did is just want to talk to him. And that was it. Yeah. So my sister always, there was always that thing of like, oh, you're Jesse's sister.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, yeah.
What's
Yeah.
the
My
age?
sister was not messed with at all.
No, clearly not. What's the difference in age between you and your older sister?
Um, I think she was a junior or a senior when I was a freshman.
Okay, so you guys are pretty even then. I
Yeah,
thought
we're all
random
pretty
3 or 4
even.
years and okay,
Hmm.
nice.
Yeah.
And so you're not close with your older sister?
Well, now, I mean, she does. My older sister does her own thing. She's always been kind of like an independent person
Hmm.
who she'll make it to family things when she can, but for the most part, she's always been an independent, not as like close with the family.
I gotcha. And so what is one of your favorite memories with your siblings?
Oh, I mean, both my sisters always wanted to do what I was doing.
Okay.
My older sister, she was a stud in the fact of if I built a bicycle ramp and you had to hit this huge bicycle ramp, she would fucking try and she would jack herself up. But she had balls. If
Yeah.
we were jumping off the roof onto the trampoline and it was sketchy because we had to like run and jump over something, she would do it. There were times where she would do it and then fly off the other side of the trampoline. She was a tough cookie. Yeah.
Okay. That's pretty awesome. All right. Um, did you ever really bicker with your siblings?
No.
That's good. I
No,
bicker.
because the older one ended up um, doing her own thing like early. She, as soon as she could be independent, drop out of school, etc., she did. And she even went, so she's my stepsister. She even went and lived with her mom early in school.
Okay.
But me and my little sister, we didn't really either.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Um, so did you ever get into a fight in your childhood? And if so, what was the outcome? If you got into multiple fights, what were the outcomes? And did you ever become friends with any of the people you fought?
I became, you could say, on friendly terms with every single one. I went to private school in um, preschool, kindergarten, and I don't remember this, but my mom always tells the story that I punched this kid who was a year older, and he had a little blood, went cried and told, but the school kind of knew he was a bully, so I didn't get in trouble.
That's good.
Yeah, and my mom said it was literally like the Monday after there was this big boxing match, and we were at my grandfather's house,
And you
and she
watched
said
it.
it was, I watched it. Yeah, my mom ended up getting me into boxing as a kid, so I boxed. I have some cool photos of me boxing as a kid.
That's
And
awesome.
then in first grade or second grade, I remember this kid named Tad. He threw sand at me, and so I just gave him a 1-2 piece right in the mouth. And then years later, still in elementary school with that same kid, we were playing basketball and we threw hands at each other for a while. And then the next day, we got called in and they said, "Had this happened before?" And we're like, "Yeah, a couple of years ago." And I swear, Tad is the nicest kid ever. I think he has a family now, and I'm probably the first and second and only person he'd ever been
He's
in a
ever
fight
fought in
with.
his life.
Yeah. And then in elementary school, though, I thought, especially like fourth grade, I thought I was the shit. And I remember getting into a couple fights with some of the fifth and sixth graders. Um, we were not in an upper middle class neighborhood by any means. So the elementary school I went to, when I was in fourth grade, the sixth graders started a gang
Oh wow.
called Boulevard Kings,
Okay.
and they jumped me into it. And I there was me and one other kid named Jared. We fought back. Everybody else like kind of
They ran.
like kind of laid on the ground and just got kicked.
Oh no. You got to
You
fight back.
know, that was how they got like jumped in.
Oh no.
I remember like me and this kid Jared, we were just swinging on all the kids. It was like we were fighting back if we're doing this. Um, in high school, I asked my mom if she could drive me to a barbecue with the whole intention to going and getting in a fight with another kid. I ended up getting jumped. Two of my buddies who I took, they ran off. Um,
And
but
they
the
left you.
kids, they didn't fully leave. They just ran away enough to where nothing happened to them. But these kids who I went to get in a fight with, they had straight men with them, like guys who were driving cars and who were like seniors and who were like 18 years old. And we were just 13 and 14-year-old kids. And they all drove off, and we were like, that was strange. They seemed awfully old. Um, and then another year in high school in the halls, I got into a fight because another boy said he wanted to fight me. We had a mutual friend. And I said, he wants to fight me? Because again, I still have an ego. I'm like the baddest MFer there is. And he goes, no, 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 no. He said he would. So the next day, we totally got in a full on scrap for how until he quit. Because at school, there was already a fight that happened on the other side of school. This was in high school. So there was no school police to break up ours because ours must have started right after.
I love
Yeah.
that.
And
Perfect timing.
it couldn't have been any better. And someone said that the PE coach opened his door, saw what was happening, and closed it. And if you knew him, his name was Coach Riley, you would believe every bit that he saw what was happening and went back into his office. Coach Riley was not the type to just break up something like that.
That's funny. Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I was the whole fighting thing is definitely a spirit animal of mine. I've never been in a fight drunk in like high school. Like, well, I never drank in high school. Never really drank in college, but I've never been in a fight intoxicated. It's not my thing.
There's a
Um,
there's a famous line from from the Rings of Power, which I believe it comes from the Silmarillion. Which, if you, I don't know if you've ever read the Lord of the Rings, have you?
Never read them. I've seen the movies. The movies were
So
cool.
the movies were great, but the books are next level. So Tolkien himself was very much so a believer in Christ, absolute Christian, and he really models a lot of the Lord of the Rings off of Jesus' resurrection. Actually, Gandalf, Frodo, and Aragorn are different representations of phases of Christ.
Okay.
And I think they're books with a lot of wisdom that you would love. But the Silmarillion, which is a novel, you can't even really say that it's a novel. It was a collection of his notes and writings, because he dies, I believe, I think he dies in 1981 or 1982. I can't remember. His wife had died the year before, and he went very shortly after she did. And on his grave, on his it says Baron, and on hers it says Luthien. Luthien was the name of this beautiful character, like the most beautiful fair maiden from his legendarium, or the collection of his writings. But one of the things in particular that he writes in the Silmarillion is never make war in anger. And
Mm-hmm.
it's one bad orc that says it in the TV show to Elrond, and he says, you've forgotten your silver rules. Never make war in anger. So
Hmm.
it's funny that you said that you've never gotten into a fight while you were drunk, because it just
Yeah.
reminded me of that. If you're going to make war, make sure that you're ready for war.
Yeah. You got to be of sound mind. Otherwise, you're coming out on the losing end. Easy.
If you'll permit me two quick anecdotes, the I didn't really get into too many fights in my life. And funny enough, I fought a guy twice in my life. The first time was when I was like in the fifth grade, and the second time was in the seventh grade. The seventh grade incident was he wouldn't stop picking on me. He'd been picking on me for like a month,
Hmm.
and the teachers caught wind of it, so I didn't get in trouble. But there came a point where he said something. I think he said something about my mother. It was either my mother or my sister. I couldn't remember, and I just, filled with Cuban pride and anger, just immediately, like, I didn't wail on him. All I did was take one hand. I was just so mad, so filled with adrenaline, that I took one hand and I actually grabbed him by the throat and lifted him up and like held him against the wall. And I just made a fist with the other one. And I didn't hit him, and I was never going to hit him, but I just like scared the crap out of him. This kid was like milk white.
Hmm.
And I don't know how I didn't get expelled, but luckily I didn't. And the teachers were like, there was one teacher that was like, no, I've seen this for like the last month. And he's come to us several times to say, hey, this doesn't stop. Please put an end to this. Talk to the kid, whatever. And nothing ever happened. And then finally, the moment that I turn around and almost kill a kid, they did it. But when I was in college, and you'll love this, when I graduated from college, there was a bar called, I think it was like the Point or Five Star. I forget what it was. And there was a guy that was with his girlfriend. And you know how, like, when you're in a crowded bar or a crowded place, whatever, there's like very little room to move. And sometimes you might be walking somewhere and somebody else is coming from the other direction. You kind of do that awkward like pause and be like, hey, can you pass by or whatever? So I get out of the way and I say, go ahead and pass. And the girl's like all grateful, whatever. The guy comes up to me and he goes, you don't tell me when to pass. And so the next thing I know, this dude who's about 6'2", 220 pounds is like peacocking on me like this, right in front of the bar. The bartender's watching the whole thing. Security's right over there. She doesn't say a word to security to try to like split it or anything. And this dude is like all in my face, telling me like, oh, all you do is talk. Why don't you throw the first punch? This and that and the other. And the two guys that are sitting behind me at the bar go, hey man, if you do throw that first punch, we'll totally jump on this dude because he tried to do this to us last week. And I was like, oh, good to know.
Well, that's funny.
Oh, it was hilarious. And the guy was like, straight up, he just looks at me and he goes, all you do is talk. Why don't you throw the first punch? And I just looked at him, and it's funny how if you stand your ground, people like really back off.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Because I'm 5'7". At the time, I think I was like maybe 165 pounds playing
Mhm.
soccer. It was before I really started like lifting. So this dude was much bigger than I was. But straight up, he said that, and I looked at him and I said, listen, buddy, I don't throw the first punch, but if we do fight, I will throw the last one.
Mhm.
And you're going to look like a bitch in front of everyone. And the sad part is that your girlfriend's here, so she'll have to watch you as I pick you up off the floor. And I just said it with such confidence that the guy legit just backed off. And then his fraternity brothers, who I played lacrosse with, came up to him and they're like, dude, you do this every freaking weekend, man. We can't take you anywhere.
Mhm.
It's ridiculous. But it's funny how sometimes you get into
Yeah.
tussles with this. The guys at the bar ended up being good friends of mine. I ended up seeing them for like years after that. But, it's funny how that works out. So, last question, and we'll close this out. So, what did you learn from the experience of having gotten into these fights when you were younger, aside from learning that you're a badass MF?
The younger part, or I guess just overall, like with fighting, because I was really into it as I was older too, is just understanding who you are as a man.
Okay.
Like, think the amount of confidence that you are able to instill in yourself just walking anywhere and never having a single worry.
Yep.
Yeah, I always enjoyed just that feeling of, I can walk anywhere. I'm not the biggest guy, but I'm not small by any means.
How tall are you?
Um, 6 foot, 6'1".
Okay.
Yeah, 6'1", and that's in my barefoot shoes.
You're barefoot shoes.
Yeah, I
So you're
wear
like
barefoot shoes everywhere.
Yeah. So assuming that you had some like non-bear shoes, you'd be like 6'2".
Yeah, back then, especially because I would wear like the shoes with,
Yeah,
I
the
don't know,
tennis shoes.
however. Yeah, exactly. They give you like a whole nother inch. Yeah, just being able to walk anywhere and just feel so like just comfortable.
I
Like
get you.
it didn't matter. Or if I was out, Halloween at the bars with like my buddies and like our girlfriends, because I wouldn't drink. It's just like it doesn't matter who says anything. And like you said, the second you confront someone, because my wife or my best friend could tell you a dozen stories of guys saying stuff and me confronting them and them saying, we weren't saying that to them. We were saying it to this guy.
Right.
Even though we knew they were talking shit about my buddy or they were talking about like his girlfriend's ass or something.
Right.
And it just never, they just, you know,
Yeah. Most people can't handle confrontation.
and I'm a very confrontational person.
I noticed.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that concludes that section. We still have obviously another section or a couple other sections to go, but
Yeah. I'm looking forward to the other ones too.
I'm looking forward to it as well. Again, just want to say thank you for giving me the time and for indulging this deeper level conversation. I really do appreciate that a lot. And I look forward to speaking to you tomorrow, excuse me. I hope that you enjoy your time with your son and enjoy the car store.